All right, welcome again to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. Today, we're going to need lots of white lightning because I forgot you wanted to talk about serious stuff.
Oh yeah, because as I do on Saturdays, I did some calculations with some of the new data on the implications of taking inoculations on your cardiac tissue, especially when it comes to the kids. And it wasn't very nice, so I might get us banned again because I used the same census data and the same calculation style to.
And who the heck knows what the guidelines are anymore, or what is or isn't bannable, because I mean, the CDC, the FDA themselves have come out and said stuff that we talked about a while ago and that other people talked about a while ago. So maybe you can say it out loud now, but who knows? Who the hell knows?
But in addition to that, either part one or part two, there are some very bold claims being made by the inoculation backers on how many lives were saved and how many hospitalizations were saved. So I kind of wanted to show how ridiculous this mathematical model is and where the bodies are in the assumptions. And there is one assumption in my calculations for the myocarditis, but I'm going to tell you exactly where that is, and you decide whether it's uh, a big deal as far as the end numbers. But let's start with the ridiculous claims. And just in case you want to share something later, I'll make that available to you. But ridiculous claim: COVID-19 vaccine saved millions of lives. Study calculates. Study calculates. Well, here's the article. You could go through that if you want to. But if you go to hold on. This is what you get when you go to the study. It's not really a study, it's more of an article itself. It's in the Commonwealth Fund. There's your peer-reviewed journal for Yale here. Little bit of backdrop, just an introduction. The findings. So they estimated that COVID-19 vaccination program in the U.S. prevented more than 18.5 million additional hospitalizations and 3.2 million. The camera's doing it again, by the way, if you can see that.
Oh, yeah,
3.2 million additional deaths. So those are the estimates. We saved 3.2 million additional deaths. Without vaccination, there would have been nearly 120 million more COVID-19 infections. The vaccination program saved blah, blah, blah in money. So those are the claims, the findings, excuse me, the findings. Their claims based on what? So here's their little chart for you. The averted number, three and a quarter million deaths, with their 95% confidence interval. Where that came from, who knows? As the critical drinker would say, or you'd say, don't know.
don't know.
Don't know. The estimate in hospitalizations, also 95% confidence interval. Where that came from, don't know. If you click on download data to see where it came from, so take a great look at that chart, okay? So kind of memorize that. And we'll go to the actual spreadsheet that you download. That's what that links to. The exact same chart. The data behind the chart is the chart. No snarky comment to go with that.
I was looking for something else, and you
Okay, so the data for the chart is
keep
the
going.
numbers from the chart. So keep that in mind, everyone, because it gets better or worse. Better from I want to shoot
That's like,
myself in the face
no,
perspective.
you know what? While we're on hot button issues that we're not allowed to talk about, let me point out for anyone who hasn't been following us, go back and find the episode where I talked about the Trump-Russia collusion crap. And more than once, the the FBI used doubled up on the same report as evidence to get a FISA warrant. So it's like that. It's like, we're doubling up on the same thing, or we're using ourselves as the source. Basically, there were times where they basically used themselves as the source for probable cause without letting the FISA court know that that's what they were doing.
Okay, so we get a chart here, comparison of reported COVID-19 incidents per 100,000 people in the US and simulated scenario without vaccination. So what we're looking at in this chart is the dots are reported incidents, so that's what actually happened. And then the blue line is their estimates based on don't know, because we don't have the data for that, because it's their own chart is the source. And so all of that area under the curve of the blue is the difference in death. Or is this hospitalization, death? Oh, incidents. So this would be cases. So all that area on the blue is what they're saying would have happened had we not vaccinated. Why we have those two peaks where there's not a peak? What goes on in that time? Why is it a peak and valley? Why isn't it just a little bit above the line the whole way? Don't know. We just kind of pulled this out of our ass because look, there's a citation under there where this chart comes from. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the top. There's the title of this article. We're going to click on the link. Their source is themselves. So we have the exact same article. So the source for the chart we just looked at is the article with the chart in the article. They just sourced themselves for their data. And where they got the numbers? From their own chart with the data. Where they got the data? Don't know. And in the discussion section, they don't acknowledge any of this. They just talk about how, man, it could have even been worse. And we will, or also they talk about in the discussion section that this is only the US. We could add to that if we just used our numbers throughout the world. So where did they get these numbers? I was curious. I looked in how they conducted the study. Didn't help. They, well, part of it did. They used Pfizer's initial release, press release for the data on the efficacy of the vaccine to show how many prevented cases there would be. So we all know how that ended up. But then other than that, they really don't tell you where they got the numbers from. So I was like, well, let's kind of go look at the actual data and see what they came up with. So what I have here is deaths from COVID-19 over the whole period of time it existed. As you can see, that chart's getting longer and longer and longer. Now this number here, I don't know where that came from. We're going to call that an outlier because that was probably a week of not reporting and then everything dumped at once, looking at the graph, because it is not representative of anything around it. But even still, we look at 7-day averages, it's not the highest. So this study starts with December 14th. Let's try to get on it, even though it's really tiny. December 14th, 2020. At that point, we had 300,000 deaths. So this is the chronological order. This isn't per day or anything like that. At the time between COVID-19 coming out and December 14th of 2020, when the vaccine was rolling out, we had 301,000 deaths. Okay, so this study went from there. Well, as we can look at this trend line here, do you see much change in that trend line? I don't see much change. It's pretty linear. Until the end, it kind of flattens out, but
Yeah.
pretty linear. So
from about here, it looks like it's starting to flatten out a little bit at least.
yeah, and there was a flat section here, which was the summer.
Mm-hmm.
June and July, which is normal for a respiratory disease. That's fine. But again, we don't see a whole lot of change since December 14th. So where did their claim come from? Again, 300,000 deaths at this point, but they're claiming from here to the other side of this, we saved 3.25 million people. Well, let's do some math here. Let's go back to here and let's find the worst week in the whole thing. There it is right there. 3,319 deaths in a 7-day average. So that was the worst week in the whole time frame of COVID-19. Would I say 3,319? Yeah, 3,319 times 50. That was the average. So 365 days times 2 years. If you had the worst week in the pandemic be every day, or the worst, the average day in the pandemic be every day, we don't even reach 3.25 million deaths, period, at all. And remember, they say they saved 3.25 million people. So that would be the difference between what actually happened and a new number. So that would mean we would be having, since there was actually a vaccine at that point, we would be having somewhere around 5 million deaths. This is how ridiculous the claim is. If you take the worst of the worst, and let's take the worst of the worst before there was a vaccine, it would be lower. I'm going to tell you that right there, because there's the worst of the worst, 2,200 deaths per day. And that was the peak.
So one of the things that made me like hiccup there while you were talking is because I was looking for some things, and then I saw a headline while I was looking for some stuff that kind of crystallized what's important here. Because I was looking for some data, some numbers to back you up from the Australian government, which a long time ago accidentally kind of let the cat out of the bag with some stuff. And then I saw a headline that said, you know what? None of that matters. What matters is that you can't trust the news you are getting. Because I saw a headline that said, quote, trans canine woman removed from OnlyFans for bestiality. We live in the stupidest timeline. This version of the multiverse is the dumbest, and I imagine the rest of the multiverse is trying to keep us from infecting them.
Okay, so this is the importance of this. This BS study happens. It uses its own charts to reference itself to say it's true.
And then you get a bunch of headlines that are just about the headline, and the details are irrelevant. The details are never examined.
Study says. So again, everybody who's going to say, well, you're not a virologist or you're not I've been dealing with this shit in the fitness industry for my whole career. Yahoo article, chocolate's great for metabolism, study says. High intensity interval training is the only thing you need to do, study says. Vegetarian veganism, eating meat causes cancer, study says. Well, we can go to that study real quick. Here we go.
Breathing causes cancer, quite frankly.
Yeah. No, the China study. Remember the one where all the mice
yeah.
All the mice in the vegan group died from the carcinogen.
That's right.
So of course none of them got cancer. They were all dead. And I'm sorry for the camera. You're just gonna have to deal with. Hopefully you're not doing mushrooms while you're watching this. But
I wish I was doing mushrooms right now.
Oh man, I'm gonna try it once in my life. I'm gonna do it. I haven't decided when, but one time.
Maybe one day we'll get big enough that Rogan will invite us on and he'll give us some. And
maybe
that'll be nice.
Maybe we can do some DMT with Sam Harris and we can finally ask him some real questions.
In the meantime, I'm just gonna stick with the red heat diet. I decided
Oh,
that's what we should call your diet of your
we have
pro
vodka.
protein and alcohol. What do you do in Russia for fun? Via
We have
vodka.
vodka.
Great, great,
Yes,
kind of
great.
underrated movie of the, was that 80s or was that early 90s? Either way, it's great. Go watch Red Heat. It's loads of fun. It's much more fun than this.
Okay, so to
Um,
summarize, study says with mathematical model, study references itself with mathematical model.
mhm.
You got to look to get where their numbers are from, and they would have had to take an average number of deaths that is probably about 2 to 3 times the maximum average number of deaths we've had the whole time, including before vaccination. And in that study, they also, in the discussion section, poop on the milder symptoms of Omicron because they say, oh, it's all the vaccine. That's why that's milder. No,
From what little I know of viral evolutionary virology, that's not how it works.
no, it's not how it works. And no, they're not saying that the virus got more mild because of the vaccine. They're saying
Okay.
that the effects of Omicron were less, and we're using
Okay.
population data to say it was weaker. But no, that's not the case because it came from South Africa, which was almost not vaccinated and almost didn't kill anybody. And we didn't see a spike in unvaccinated rates of hospitalization with Omicron. We saw a reduction. And then we can go to the Australian data where 95% of the cases in the hospital are vaccinated, but only 90% of the population is vaccinated. Where did that extra 5% come from? Oh my gosh, it's not helping.
So while we're on no, that was the wrong button. Hold on. While we're in the process of getting banned here, share screen. Okay. So this is what I was looking for, and I'll just go through it. The Australian government, surprisingly, considering, they're building camps to put people in, has actually been pretty good on their data. Now, granted, when you look at this adverse event data, uh, they have headlines and, uh, 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 they break up the data and they're editorializing while they're giving you the data, but at least they're giving you the data. The reason I was looking for this is because I was looking for a specific number that the Australian government had put out there like a year ago of 1 in X number of injections lead to an adverse event. And I didn't want to give the number if I couldn't find it, and I couldn't find it. But then I realized, because, we have trans canines getting kicked off of OnlyFans, that that's not what's important. What's important is that you can't trust the authorities, the people you're supposed to parrot, or you get banned off of YouTube and social media. Even before that number, what's important about this headline is this date. November 16th, 2021
That a
is
long
what
time
this
ago.
is what this article from the Sydney Morning Herald is. And then there were 10,000 Australians uh, filing for vaccine injury claim. The Australian government, despite all their problems with COVID stan, they were one of the first governments that I heard of that were actually addressing this issue. They had set up a fund because it was mandatory, because they were mandating that people get these injections. They at least had the uh, moral and intellectual honesty to say, therefore, we have to do something about people who have adverse events. As soon as they set this fund up, they had, within a very short period of time, 10,000. And that's how I heard about it, because they had so many people that they were having to readdress the issue to increase the fund. Kind of like how here you had these, oh, look at us, we, puff up our chests and re-vote for me because I voted for this thing to give small businesses some relief because we forced them to shut down. And the dirty little secret was within something like 72 hours, all of that money was gone because so many people had filed claims for relief. Well, the same thing happened here with Australia and the adverse event relief, is that so many people had filed claims they had to go, oh, we're going to have to do some more here. And there have been, I shared a while back that the German government had kind of admitted this, that they actually gave a number to, you know, X in Y injections lead to adverse events or lead to serious adverse events. Um, and the reason I bring this up is because I haven't had time to dig into the latest Twitter dumps, but this is the big one that has been being talked about right now, which is that a Pfizer board member, they say bigwig here, I'm pretty sure it was a board member.
It was Gottlieb, I think, who's the former FDA guy that,
Okay.
yeah.
I hadn't heard a name to it, so I wasn't sure who it was, but
It's right
yeah.
there. FDA head, Dr. Scott Gottlieb, on the
Okay.
top, the top of the.
That does not surprise me because he was an absolute shill for the big pharma narrative. And he was pressuring. Well, first of all, the idea that a former FDA head is now a big wig at one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world should raise all kinds of red flags in the first place. And this guy was all over cable news during the height of the pandemic, when people weren't sure, when there was a lot of information being thrown around. He was all over the place. Anyone who had him on without disclosing his connections should be ashamed of themselves, and nobody should ever watch them again. And then, of course, we find it goes deeper than that, that someone who stood to financially benefit from the narrative was pressuring Twitter to censor tweets opposing the COVID vaccine. Consider everything we know now. Look back at that Pfizer exec before the EU committee saying, of course we didn't test to see if it stopped transmission. We were having to move too fast.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, you say that now. How many times can I go find the CEO of Pfizer who, funny little aside, he's not an MD, he's a veterinarian. Horse-based. Just gonna leave that out there. Anyway, how many times can we find him touting the miraculous effects of get this and you won't get it? Our studies show it is, 98, 96% effective. Those were the numbers that were being thrown out at the very beginning when they
And
first
remember,
announced that they had this.
despite the ridiculousness of the estimates, those are also the numbers used to determine, based on the ridiculous estimates, how many people were saved, quote unquote, saved by the inoculation. So again, this is the definition of bad science. It's not even science. It's a mathematical model they pulled from their ass so they can get more funding from the government, is what it was. And this is what happens when you let admin run your scientific programs. That's the kind of science you find in critical social justice right there. We found this one little peak here, and we're going to go with it. And then we're going to overestimate everything because, hey, it's better that way because social justice. Well, in this case, we're going to run with this big giant number because vaccine hesitancy. What do you got there?
All right, so remember this. We talked about this when it came out. This was a huge study because it was the military and the VA. So you had a ton of people, and anyone who was active duty was required to get it. So, uh, this says 780,000. I remember the number being 600 something thousand. So, whatever, a ton of people, especially when you're talking about a study. And so they looked at the efficacy. Um, and so, and your point is what made me think of this, of the people who are saying lives saved are using those initial claims and are not bothering to look at, okay, but what did we learn with the real world data? And here we are again. Look at the timeline, for
Hold on a
crying out
second.
effing loud. Okay,
Sorry about that, guys.
hiccup there. Yes, so my first ranting angry point was look at the date again. November 2020 fricking one. Okay? This is old news and yet it is completely forgotten. So as a reminder, what happened here with this huge uh, study of military personnel was the long-term effects of the jabs versus what was claimed. All right. And so this is November of 2021. So this is the first long-term study we had with large numbers in real time. Specifically looking at that, you could learn some of this from like the initial Israel and Great Britain data, because they put out a lot of good data and good numbers early on, uh, that people could look up and figure out for themselves. But this study looked at it flat out and said, wet whoa. Um, so this is in the height of the Delta. People are concerned about all that. All three COVID-19 vaccines available to Americans lost some of their protective power. That's an interesting way to put it. Who was this? LA Times. Some of their protective power, with vaccine efficacy among a large group of veterans dropping between 35 and 85%. Now the big number there is because there were demarcations for which of the three, the Pfizer, Moderna, or J&J, and over what time. I believe they looked at 30 days, 3 months, and 6 months, if I'm remembering this correctly. And the 6 months was the worst for all of them. Now, Johnson & Johnson was the worst, but all of them were terrible by 6 months. So by the end of September, Moderna's two dose measured as 89% effective, but was only 58% effective.
Now, was this against infection or was this against severe disease?
I'm pretty sure this was infection.
Okay, because that's an important
Yes.
distinction, because
Their ability to prevent infections.
yeah, that's an important distinction, because when you're looking at an antibody response versus a T cell response, remember, it's the antibody response. Once those antibodies wane, then they're probably you're not going to have that initial line of defense. But then as soon as your body encounters it again, it starts mounting a new defense. So you still get infected, but you don't get seriously ill. Same thing happens with natural immunity, right? You get this T cell memory, this B cell memory, and when you encounter it again, you start getting the sniffles, you start getting a little bit sick, and then your body takes care of it. So there's an important distinction there. Now, where it goes deeper is, we'll get into, this is the second part of what I wanted to talk about, which is not the China study. It is, here we go. Benjamin, I'm going to assume that's Knudsen. I'm assuming he's German, so you would pronounce the K. And Vinay Prasad, people would know him from YouTube fame, but he is a really good epidemiologist. Check out his channel to get validation on all the things we say. But they did a a meta-analysis, systemic review of myocarditis in young males. And you can look through the methods. This is an abstract. I encourage everybody to look at the whole thing. Same under the same link. I'll link it in the description. But this is where I started doing math, because we get down here. Here we go. Males aged 12 to 24 years after dose 2 of mRNA-based vaccine, incidence of 15 cases per 100,000. So that doesn't sound like a lot till you actually look at a population, because we don't know 100,000 people, any one of us. But let's go to the census. And this is actually an underestimate because this is 2019 numbers, because the census has been slow with the 2020 numbers. They give you the racial breakdown, but they don't give you the age yet, as of the last time I looked. But what you have here is we have these two age groups, because again, it was 12 to 24 years old. And obviously we don't have 12 to 24 years old in a breakdown. We don't even have a 12 to 14 here. So I took the 15s to the 24s, totaled them up, times that point, that number. Oop, this is the higher one. Sorry, this one should be, I forgot to save 0.15 something. Okay, so
Oh, sorry, I'm laughing at your camera glitching out. We were playing around with this before we started recording, and we don't think it's the camera, but it's the connection or the wires or something, because we tried the laptop camera, which is awful lighting and clarity, so we figured might as well stick with the one that actually looks good, but sometimes makes him look like Max Headroom. If you don't know who Max Headroom is, go away, because you're making me feel old.
okay, so if you take the 15 per 100,000 predicted cases, if you inoculated everyone between 12 and 24 years old, is pretty close to 500,000 people. And this is, if we go back to the study, this is not including mild myocarditis. This is only clinical cases of myocarditis. Why aren't you?
And it's only myocarditis. This is something I asked you when we were texting about this, that there is a major concern because, crud, who was it? About a year ago, someone did a good sized study. It was the study that said, that kind of blew the lid off the idea that, and people seem to have forgotten this, but there was concern actually raised early on of, hold on a second, you're injecting me with this thing, this spike protein that is the problem. And we were told, oh, don't worry about it. It stays in your shoulder, stays in your arm, it stays in the muscle there. No, it doesn't. And there was a study early on talking about how long after injection that the spike protein was in the body.
I'm getting there.
You're getting there.
I'm getting there. Don't get ahead of me. Don't get ahead of me.
But that same early study pointed out that the spike protein likes to congregate in certain places. So the myocarditis is a big effing deal, because as you've pointed out, there's a reason you don't die of heart cancer. Because if just a little bitty problem with your heart pops up,
we're getting there. We're getting there.
Okay.
Let's set the stage.
But there are other problems.
Okay, so that 500,000 was the low end. Let's go down to the actual studies here, and we'll bring up. So one of the points they're making with this article was the numbers you're seeing in the media are not age stratified.
And this is still from the Vinay, what's his bucket?
Yes, yeah.
And it's okay.
And so the whole point of this article is, if you age stratify, everything looks different. Because if you're looking at 80-year-old males, it's different than if you're looking at 14-year-old males. And so we'll get into the why here. But once you age stratify, the numbers come out different. So we got the low end just a second
Mm.
ago with the 15 per 100,000. Well, here's a nice peak in one of these studies, 18 to 24-year-old males. There's your high end, 53.7 out of 100,000. Okay, so and that's per doses, that's not per person.
So is that D2 dose 2?
Yeah, the D2 is dose 2. So this is
Uh-huh.
after dose 2. So 53 out of 100,000. If we take that high end number and we go back to our spreadsheet, which is the original number I had in there, so I'll just hit undo, undo, undo. 151, or excuse me, 1,513,000 cases. So if we inoculate everyone from 12 to
What
24 years old, we have a range of possible cases between 500,000 and 1.5 million cases of clinical myocarditis, not mild.
and this is just US, right?
This is just US. This
Yeah.
is this is based on the actual reported data. This isn't even taking the Thailand study where they measured before and after and
Mhm.
found subclinical myocarditis, which was even much higher. So yes, it's rare, 15 out of 100,000. So we can satisfy YouTube by saying it's rare, but rare is significant. Remember the
Well,
difference between
yeah.
statistical significance and magnitude? Well, we're talking about 500,000, so 500,000 to 1.5 million young adults with a significant heart issue. And of course, myocarditis is a symptom. It's inflammation of the heart. What is causing it? Well, now we're getting into the other stuff you were starting to bring up.
Yeah. Well, that's a good the point you just made is a good point, and it ties to actually what we were talking about last Wednesday when we were talking about, cosmology, creationism, etc. Is that, you know, yeah, the odds of all this happening randomly are low, but if you look at the trillions of stars out there, it could have happened randomly. Yes, the odds of clinical myocarditis is low, but when you're talking about, I want to say it's 80% of Americans have gotten at least one dose.
Yeah, it's somewhere around 80%.
Yeah. So that's a big effing number. So now all of a sudden that rare instance of, X in 100,000, that's a low number. Okay, except you're talking about 330 million Americans. So if almost everybody is partaking in this event, whatever it is, okay, well now you've got a lot of issues. Now you've got a lot of chances for that otherwise rare event to happen because you are increasing the denominator or numerator, whatever. I'm tired. This makes me
Okay,
mad.
so I promised to talk about the assumption I made because I'll
Oh
show you
yeah,
where my
okay.
bodies are buried. So we didn't have 12 to 24-year-old breakdown in the census data. So
Mm,
my assumption was, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Well, 12, 13, 14, 3/5 of this number was the 12 to 15-year-old, or
now
12 to
you
14.
mentioned this, and I don't remember if you mentioned it while we were recording or not, a little while ago, that 10, 15 years ago when you were doing graduate level research, it was a lot easier to find numbers, to find
Mhm.
demographics.
Oh, realistically, if we had true uh, open data, this would be age 0, this number, age 1, this number,
Mm,
all the way up to whatever the oldest person in the United States is. We would be able to do it by age period, not little age ranges. Now, I'm assuming they picked age ranges because of markers, and I could see puberty markers here, but
hmm
at the same time, they're doing different reports with different ranges to make it hard on everybody to check their work.
Yeah.
But if you look at the numbers going forward, yeah, the difference between the different age brackets isn't that much. So I can assume that's going to be within percentage points of 11-year-olds versus 12-year-olds versus 13-year-olds versus 14-year-olds. So that was my assumption. Again, we're looking at an estimate. Like it's still going to be somewhere around 1.5 million, whether it's just under 1.5 million, just over 1.5 million. Still the same. I just let people know where my bodies are buried. But that was the assumption I made in my mathematical model. Other than that, everything's just cut and dry. And it's not even hard math. It's you find the percentage of incidents, you multiply it by the number of people. There you go.
Yeah. And
No inverse logarithm to the e power of this such and such statistical model that we used, because you can put any variable you want in to get the number you want.
no, we are over 2 years now that we have been dealing with this. So we shouldn't need statistical models because we have 2 years. The only statistical model would be if you were going to push outwards and say, you know, in 5 years, in 10 years, in whatever. We have 2 years of real world data.
Mm-hmm.
We don't need to be messing with real world models. You can,
Or
I
the
mean,
one we just addressed, which was the counterfactual to if we had done nothing. The only problem is
yes,
there's so many bodies buried in that. I just pointed out the obvious ones. What other ones were thrown in there to get
right.
the number they wanted?
Well,
We don't know because they didn't disclose their data.
that VA study, that military study, okay, we should be able to do that with the entirety of America. The the data's there. Why isn't it being put out?
No, we can't because the data is not there. Because remember, in May of
Okay,
2020, they stopped tracking breakthrough infections.
that's right. I
And
forgot that.
yeah,
So, because my point was the data's there, it's just not being publicized by the agencies who should be publicizing this stuff. But I'd forgotten that no, the agencies that should be tracking this decided, we don't need to worry about that.
yeah, there was a day and age when the CDC, all they did was track and post the raw data. It wasn't an advisory committee. All it was a tracking and an information center. And it was easy to use. It was like a big Excel sheet online. You went there, you put in your disease, you put in your age group, you put in your, if you wanted a certain area, say like I wanted Ohio or something, I could put that in, and then you got numbers. And then you did with the numbers what you needed to do with the numbers. Now you get articles. And
Mm.
then when you click on the links to the sources, it's articles about the articles. And as you just saw what we just did, they reference themselves. Uh,
I'm gonna, well,
what do you want me to go into details about the stuff you were talking about that I said hang on
It,
to that?
yeah, in a second, but while you're looking at that, I do want to bring, because while you were talking, it made me think of this. This was a little while ago. When was this? March of 2022. So this was like shortly after uh everyone lost their ever loving mind and tried to get Spotify to drop Joe Rogan because Dr. Malone was on it. Um, the reason I like this is because Glenn Beck is kind of a dummy, and so but he's also he's a media guy who's been a news guy for a long time. So he knows how to ask the right questions in the right way. So anyone who's curious about this stuff, I would recommend you go watch just search Glenn Beck, Dr. Malone, and this should pop up pretty close to the top, episode 137 of his podcast. Um, and the reason I highly recommend it is because it is the best basic explanation I have heard from Dr. Malone on what the mRNA technology is and why it was important, or why it was uh, uh, a breakthrough at the time, but then why. So he came up with this idea and patented it and published it in 1987. So why are we just now getting this on the mainstream? And he explains that. And I don't want to go into it because I don't want to do it injustice. It is a very good elementary, just about anyone should be able to understand this of this is what mRNA is. This is how and why I came up with the technology for an mRNA vaccine. This is why I didn't pursue it. And this is why no one else really pursued it either. And it's a very good explainer, which again, back to when you were making your original points, is the very idea. We shouldn't have to get into the minutia here because we have authorities that have repeatedly, is it too strong to say they've lied? We I guess we can't attribute motive yet because we're not in a court of law and we don't have affidavits. So maybe we shouldn't say they lied. They did not adequately explain the situation to people
We didn't have informed consent.
repeatedly.
Yeah, that's the main thing. So back to the things you were jumping on earlier.
Mhm.
You had the two main points, the distribution throughout your body, and then how long it lasts in your body.
Mhm.
So those are related, but they're two separate things. So which one do you want me to start with?
Let's start with the distribution because I think that's a big deal because especially since Damar Hamlin and all of the controversy around that and the argument around that of, and you shared that when we talked about it last week of the douchey MD who said y'all are all just stupid and evil. But then on the other side, there were some people who were immediately jumping on, well, did the guy get jabbed? I am sympathetic to that point, but I also think, hey, let's have a more reasoned and calm discussion of things. But so you've got a lot of focus on, and a lot of people understand the myocarditis and the heart issues. I'm trying to tiptoe here. I personally know someone who was in how should I phrase this to be the most circumspect. One of the early issuances of the jabs. I won't say which one and I won't say when, but this person had a major reproductive system issue that had to be addressed at a time, at an age when it should not have had to been addressed.
Okay, so now we're talking the distribution, and this is a big thing with the reproduction thing. And there's two main things about what's in the chemical formula. There's the actual mRNA, and then there's the delivery system, which is the lipid nanoparticles. And for those of us in the fitness and nutrition industry, we know our cellular membranes are actually coated with lipids, and you need something fat soluble in a lot of incidences to get into the cell. That's the reason for the lipid nanoparticles. So this was actually developed to distribute things to your whole body. And a lot of people that were in on this in the early days, all in as far as supporting it, were led to believe that there had been some breakthrough that it would be more specific than just all over your body. But this technology was actually designed to be able to permeate almost every cell in your body. That's a problem. But it's also it does preferentially go to things like the testes and the ovaries, which might be one of the missing links with where the incidents of adverse events happen, because with the women it's later, with the males it's earlier. But there's also different developmental stages. So when males are pumping out the most that their testes can do, well, guess what? That's about Damar Hamlin's age. Whereas women are kind of all over the place. They have a spike early, and then they tend to trend towards autoimmune disease as we go along in life. That's just a female trait, and there's a lot of reasons for that. We won't go into the biology of that. But the lipid nanoparticle itself is meant to permeate all tissues. When they said it was going to stay in the deltoid, well, that was wrong, because it has this technology that allows it to travel all throughout the body and get into everything.
Which is where I say we need Nuremberg 2.0, and this is one of the reasons why, because back in the 80s, and we actually brought up uh, the statutes of why this is and how this is some time ago, but the reason the VAERS system exists is because the pharmaceutical companies lobbied the government and said, look, we can't continue to research and put out vaccines if every time there's an adverse incident, we get sued out of existence. And that will harm society as a whole. And so the government indemnified, they made them immune to being sued. There's some loopholes and there's some caveats, blah, blah, blah. Go watch one of the law people who are better. Like I think Viva Barnes has talked about this for a bit. But the idea was uh, we will set up this system to help protect the public in case there are adverse events, and the trade-off is you can't be sued for certain vaccines. That was predicated on an open and honest system. If you are committing fraud, if you are lying to people, then it doesn't matter if you have a contract with them. I've used this example before, but if you and I have a contract for services or for items, you're a trainer, so I'm going to provide you with X number of widgets for training purposes at Y price at Z timetable. If I know ahead of time that this widget is defective and I'm selling it to you anyway, it doesn't matter what legal loophole, what legal protections I have in that contract that says you can't sue me when one of your clients gets hurt using the widget, because I knew I was committing fraud. I entered into that contract in bad faith. So in that instance, any court in the United States would say, no, you don't have this contractual protection because you knew that this widget was defective, so he can sue you. They knew that this widget was defective. They knew ahead of time because of the very basic nature of this technology that, yeah, it's not going to stay there. But we were being told ad nauseum, don't worry about it, it stays there.
Well, and then we go into things like, should we have been aspirating and all of those other little variables. But to put a cap on this little section, no, the lipid nanoparticles aren't causing the problems, but they're allowing anything toxic in the formula to get into every tissue in our body. So they're not the cause, but they're the delivery system to the cause. They're the car that gets the bank robber to the bank.
If anyone can find this, post it below. This is what I was looking for, and I didn't have a lot of links ready because I had forgotten that that you wanted to talk about this and you had a bunch of stuff prepped. And so I was prepping. I was hoping we were going to talk about Lord of Chaos today, because we're going to theoretically have a special guest later this week. Very early on, one of the first adverse event reports didn't come from the medical community. It came from the religious community. So the New York City had a bunch of mandates. And so it was one of the early places where a large volume of the vaccine was delivered and was distributed and was used. And there were some very early reports from the Orthodox Jewish community. The reason being, because a lot of people don't know this, but because it's not as big, but um, they have rules very similar to Orthodox Catholics. So, uh, birth control is verboten. So you track your menstrual cycles very assiduously. And the rabbis are part of that. So the rabbis know because that's part of their ministering to their flock, so to speak. So a bunch of rabbis were reporting to the health authorities, um, we have a problem here because one, we have young women whose cycles are all out of whack. They are happening when they're not supposed to. They're lasting longer than they should, etc. More concerningly, we are having post-menopausal women who are having a period. That's not supposed to happen for anyone who doesn't know. This was some of the very early reporting, and I can't freaking find the articles. I have page after page talking about how the Orthodox Jewish community in New York City was hit hard, was uh
We
uh
did a whole episode on this.
yeah, I thought we had talked about this, and now I am well, I closed it. I'm finding page after page talking about how the Orthodox Jewish community in New York City was led astray by misinformation, and so uh they had waves of COVID hit them hard now, and it completely ignoring the documented reasons why they were so hesitant to get these jabs. Very early on, this was an issue and you weren't allowed to talk about it. And we're still not talking about it. Kudos to those who are talking about the myocarditis. And it's nice that you can theoretically talk about it now without getting at least instantly banned, but it's not the only issue, and it's a problem.
Well, issue number 2 we brought up was the long-lasting uh, spike in the system.
Yeah.
And as my camera is messing up again, we're about to go away from it. So
Yeah, good.
there was a challenge at the beginning of all this: storage and stability of mRNA-based COVID-19 vaccines. Remember, they had to be stored at negative
Yeah.
80 degrees Fahrenheit, and there was all these issues, and that was why it was trouble. They had trouble rolling it out, and all these things. Well, they changed part of the structure, so it's basically a synthetic mRNA vaccine now instead of
Hmm.
an actual
I hadn't
duplicate.
even heard that.
Yeah, duplicate of the actual spike protein. It's enough like it that it comes out basically the same for our antibody, for our immune response, but it is different in a way that it's more stable. But it's not just more stable in transport, it's also more stable in our bodies.
Mm.
So the difference between getting infected and taking care of the virus and getting an inoculation and the spike protein being proficient in your body is that the infected is the regular version, which dies and sheds because it's a living organism.
Mm-hmm.
Now we have officially created a Franken virus that, yes, it is more stable to allow for more inoculations to happen, but it's also more stable in your body. Remember, there was a day and age when, polyunsaturated fats weren't so bad for you, but then we homogenized them and they became trans fats. Similar to that. You change it just a little bit to make it more stable, and all of a sudden it's a big problem.
That is one of my favorite analogies for health and science stuff too, because why did we do that? We did that because saturated fat was evil and going to kill you, which we have shown more than once was
I'm,
based on faulty science.
I'm going to be more generous than you. We did that because we had this readily available source of these oils and fats, but they were not easy to store. And so we made it to where we could store them at room temperature.
I think the health thing comes before that. I really think the reason they were looking for a way to store those fats is because they weren't animal fats. They weren't saturated fats.
No, I think the reason they were looking for a way to store them is because we had an abundance of them.
Mm.
But then they pushed the message that the other ones were bad for you, so you would buy the ones we had the abundance of. So a little bit different order doesn't make it any better.
That's
But
yeah, yeah.
but at the same time, we homogenized these oils, which made them into something that was actually really, really, really bad for you. And then it turns out when you talk about polyunsaturated fats, again, not so bad in nature. You eat a sunflower seed, not so horrible for you. But you have sunflower seed oil that you boiled something in, that heat denatures it, and all of a sudden it's not that great for you. So a little change that seems harmless and seems productive at the time can be a big issue. But unfortunately, still on the CDC website, they say it clears from your system within days. That is not the case.
That is still on the website.
That is still on the website.
So they took down the thing where they said it stays in your shoulder. It stays in the injection site. They took that down, but they're still claiming it clears your system because the study I brought up from a while ago was that a 90-day, was that a 3-month or a 6-month study? I don't remember, but it it showed that the spike protein was moving throughout the body, was found in other cells, in other systems, especially the reproductive organs, which was problematic. And I can't remember if it was a 3 or 6-month study, but the reason that's important is it showed that it stayed at least that long, but it said nothing about any longer than that because that's all that they studied. That was the timeline of their study, and I don't know if there has been a major study since to investigate even long, because again, we have 2 effing years of real world data. We should have plenty of data to look at. We should have plenty of data to look up and say, well, there's this, but there's that. Well, over here, yeah, but over there, so we have to balance. A lot of this is speculation. A lot of this is looking up studies from, you know, the articles I brought up were from 2021. I shouldn't have to do that. I should be able to look up an article from last week and say, well, here's this study here. Here's this article here.
There you go. CDC.gov.
Yikes. Well, do you have anything more on this topic, or should we move to something a little happier? A little
Well, I was
funner?
going to talk about why this is important, because I brought up the myocarditis, then we went through the two things you brought up, but then we look at the data, second dose, or the first dose after the infection, we were seeing these effects. So it's not really happening on the first dose, and it's not really happening on the infection very much. In fact, when you look at the charts for comparing the vaccines to the actual infection, for myocarditis rates, you actually have to reduce the myocarditis rate because that's reported infections. That's not seroprevalence. That's not people who had the disease and just didn't go to a doctor or were asymptomatic or any of those things. So that the denominator actually grows on that one. So it's a lesser number. But where we're seeing this is the second dose or the first dose after someone's been infected. which is why I didn't get my son vaccinated. But
And look, anecdotally, it does happen because you didn't. My son didn't get vaccinated either. And we talked about it, and he was in agreement with me that there was no point. He ended up getting it. He had some serious complications from it. I'm not going to go into the details because it's still a little fuzzy on
mhm.
what exactly happened and what the problem is. It's also a little fuzzy, and you've talked about this, that you've brought up some of the long COVID issues, and some of them appear to be temporary, some of them don't. But like the point is 2 effing years of real world data, we should be able to bring those numbers up. Just click clack. Okay, here's the numbers. Here's what the numbers from this institution are showing for long COVID. Here's what they're showing for, with vaccination, with 2 dose. We're kind of having to guess, and we shouldn't have to after 2 effing years.
Well, we had a luxury though that you didn't have. You had the discussion, and then it happened later. He had COVID, and then was eligible.
Mm,
So we would have been in that category of having the disease and then getting first dose. So basically, it's second dose of immunity. Whereas you were in the case of, well, I'm young and healthy, maybe I don't need it, which is a different situation.
mhm.
And it's a valid situation, but it's a different situation. But looking at the data now, I'm even more glad we made the decision we made. And I actually let him make the decision, which of course, glad my son could do math, uh but here's the thing, here's the reason. So we're looking at what's the mechanism of that. Why is the first dose not doing it, even though we know the things we just talked about? Nanoparticles go everywhere. Spike protein lasts a long time in your system because you basically make your cell into a spike protein factory, not the other way around. You're not injecting spike protein. You're injecting the code that makes your body make it. So that's different. This is one way it's different than traditional vaccines. Well, after you've had your first incidence of exposure, whether that's first dose or infection, you have T cell memory. And the difference between antibodies and T cells is huge. So antibodies work when a spike protein or the disease itself that's expressing spike protein shows up in your bloodstream outside of the cell. So in the extracellular space, the antibodies attack it and kill it. But if it's in the cell, the antibodies aren't doing anything because it's not in that extracellular space where they're at. Now, the way the inoculation is supposed to work is it's supposed to express itself on the outside of the cell and allow your immune system to start doing the things it needs to do. But after that first dose or after the initial infection, you have T cell and B cell memory. And so when your cells become the factory for it, they're going to continue to make it until the cell dies and explodes and then spreads it to the rest of your body. What the T cells do at that point is they keep that from happening. So they kill the cell before it can spread it to the rest of your body. That's great if it's in your liver, because your liver will regenerate those cells, no problem. That's okay if it's in your muscle cells, or if it's in, like the deltoid, like we're supposed to have it, or if it's in, even in your lung or something like that, which regenerates, that's fine. But when it gets to cardiac tissue and a cell expresses the spike protein and a killer T cell comes and kills that cell, we don't regenerate that. Not very well. Again, you said that's why we don't have heart cancer, right?
Mhm.
You don't have heart cancer because you don't regenerate cardiac cells very well. What you end up with is scar tissue in that spot. And when you have scar tissue in that spot and it happens to be in the line of a node where the electrical pulse goes through to create your heart rhythm, that's where we get issues, which may be what happened last week, but also is most likely what's happening with the thousands, over 1,000 athletes that are going down, with the people dying suddenly with the Germany autopsy study. Scar tissue on the heart messes with that. So Yeah, so it makes sense that it happens on the second dose, because after the first dose, you develop that memory with the T cells, and then you express it within the cells because that's how this thing works. And instead of just creating more antibodies, the whole thing turns on the cells themselves and starts killing them. If it was limited to the deltoid like it's supposed to be,
Mhm.
that would be fine. But it's not. So pulling it all together, we have these things that last forever in your body are creating a situation where your body wants to kill itself to prevent it. And if that happens in certain tissues, we've got problems. Houston, we have problems.
All right, well, let's pause for a second and then end on something fun because Grandpa has to go to the bathroom.
I've got one more thing to
Okay.
tack on the end of it because it involves the younger
Ah,
population, but then we'll end on fun. Right. One last thing, and we'll get on to fun stuff. So take everything we just talked about, and now let's talk about the younger age groups. The more metabolically active the cells, the more spike protein produced.
hmm.
Now, if you're 80 years old, are many of your cells very metabolically active?
I had not thought about that, and that explains a lot why, for a while now, people who have been concerned about the jabs uh have been admitting, look, it may be beneficial to the older age brackets. The data seems to indicate that it's better for the older. And this was something, this was one of the things I was looking up and couldn't find and was pissing me off. If you watch football, you have seen ad nauseum this obnoxious commercial saying COVID-19 is still an issue, and some people get it worse than others. Wait,
The Paxlovid that's not a Paxlovid commercial.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
They never actually mention the drug name, which is an issue because the reason, like every other drug, like Paxlovid is Pfizer, right?
Mm-hmm.
So their big thing that you usually see on football during football commercials is the little blue pill. They tell you what it's called, and then they tell you what very quickly at the end what the potential side effects are. So you can research it, look it up for yourself, and have an informed conversation with your doctor about getting your boner pills. And yet, for some reason, not this thing. I guess boner pills are more important. Whatever. Anyway, well, I mean, I guess they are, but that's not the point. Um, I was looking for that because the first time I saw that commercial, it cheesed me off because the very same people pushing this commercial and pushing this drug are the same people that said you wanted to kill grandma if you ascribe to, say, the Great Barrington Declaration, who were 100 something doctors, MDs, who said, wait a minute, we've never treated a pandemic like this before. You quarantine the most vulnerable, not the entire frickin' population.
50,000, by the way. 50,000 doctors and scientists.
More than I thought.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I will go forward and say I signed it, and you had two options. You can sign it as a civilian, or you could sign it as a health professional, and you had to go through a little process to sign it as a health professional. So it wasn't just something anybody could sign. And on the health professional side, it was 50,000.
That's interesting. I did not know that
Yeah, so
because
I had to put in credentials and education and everything behind what I was doing. So
and there are, from the email dump from the FOIA request of Fauci's emails, he went after those people. He talked about the Barrington Declaration. He talked about discrediting, his word, those professionals because they were contradicting the narrative. And now all of a sudden, you have a commercial from a big drug company touting a drug saying the same damn thing.
so you brought up reproduction. So in going, kind of piggybacking on the metabolically active cells, your young friend What's active right now in this young female more than anything else at that age, probably
Hmm.
early 20s, mid 20s?
Hmm.
Reproductive system. It is time to breed, whether
So
you
for
want it or not.
for women, it's like late teens to 30 is like the peak, right?
Mhm.
And then for men, it's even longer than that,
And
right?
and the thing about this is, it doesn't matter where it's generated, it can get into any tissue in your body. So if you're this young male whose gonads are going crazy, you can be producing spike like that, but it could still end up in your heart, it could still end up in your lungs, it could still end up anywhere in your body. So when we look at the males, that peak age for the side effects was that big spike in that chart I brought up earlier, 18 to 24, which is where number 3 was. But why? Well, your heart is developing at a higher rate. This is why males shouldn't be competing in female sports, because their heart, we're designed to be badass in our 20s as men, where women are designed to last a little bit longer. That's why they live longer. Women are designed to be mommies, 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 then grandmas. Grandmas have a huge role in tribal communities in our evolutionary cycle, because they help mommies be mommies.
That's an interesting point that I had not considered, that the grandma is so important because she's there.
Mhm. Why do men have midlife crises? Because we're not designed to live past our 40s. This is true. I mean, that's just a simple way of saying it, where grandmas are just basically using their mommy instinct to continue on with life. And their immune systems, why they're more prone to autoimmune disease, is because their immune systems are hyper reactive, because in nature, that's a good thing. In a world of excess gluten, that's not a good thing, right? We're designed different. I'm sorry, YouTube, men and women are different.
Oh no.
And when it comes to the side effects of this inoculation, women are having more autoimmune issues and men are having more heart issues, because especially in that 18 to 24 range, we're on overdrive to be badass killing machines. Hence a football player.
Well, and hence the football players that are mysteriously and
Any
suddenly collapsing on
competitive
the field.
male. How about that?
It is it, well, but the football, especially the reason, again, 2 freaking years of real world data, and I brought this up last time we talked about COVID, is that, you know, MD doucheface on Twitter there is just ignoring the fact that for 2 years we've had European high level soccer players just literally collapsing on field. We freaked out about Damar Hamlin because we really haven't seen it here in the US. It's not a big deal in Europe. They've been seeing it for a while. Well, there's probably a reason for that. Soccer is far more cardiovascularly intensive than
Mhm.
American football is.
Yeah, they are wicked cardiovascular athletes. They can run at probably max heart rate for quite some time. And what we get spoiled with even with basketball, you think a court sport, well, they're running back and forth, but there's timeouts, there's TV timeouts. One of the reasons football, soccer is not very popular in the States is because they haven't found an advertisement model that fits with it, because you can't break for
Mhm.
commercial. It just keeps going.
Yeah. And so it's really hard to make the sports entertainment part of it.
So how much of it is Americans not entertained by it, and how much of it is advertisers not wanting to play it?
So you can't put it on when
Yeah.
Americans would be most interested in sitting down to watch it.
Hmm. But that was what I had. So to summarize, this shit ain't good, and more details will keep coming out, because this is the great thing. This is why I love capitalism, because there are so many conflicting interests with this. And initially, it was the money making by pharma, but what happens when someone dies in the NFL? All these NFL teams have life insurance company or policies on their players,
Mhm.
which don't pay out if you're taking an experimental drug. And you don't think those life insurance companies are going to say, "We want an autopsy"? I want to see if there's scar tissue on this kid's
I,
heart.
I I've referenced this before, but there was one of the big military cases was a group. I'm blanking on the name of it because they tend to specialize in um, religious liberty cases because this Navy SEAL had claimed a religious exemption that was denied, like almost all of them were in the military. And he went to a court martial because he stuck to his guns and he said, "No, I'm not taking this." And the court was shocked to learn. They didn't know. They just assumed, wait, what? This is still an experimental drug because by the UCMJ, the Uniform Code of Military Justice, you cannot prescribe a vaccine, a medical treatment that is experimental. And they said, look, this Navy SEAL is not obligated to follow. This is an unlawful order because this is an experimental drug. And the judge, who is going to be a very high-ranking individual, and the jury, which is pulled from officers and NCOs, they all went, huh? Because they just assumed that the military wouldn't force you to take. They wouldn't prescribe this. They wouldn't mandate this if this was experimental, because that's against the UCMJ. But nope.
Well,
And
let's get back to football since we're going to talk about that in our fun
we're
part.
not allowed to talk about it.
I am slightly vindicated by the fact that the person involved here, number 3, was first words were, "Did we win?" and was actually a little bit upset that they didn't finish the game. So all the people that in my life called me insensitive for saying they should have finished the game, and other words related to insensitive but more French. The victim in the whole situation agrees with me. Life should have gone on. There was nothing they could have done for him after that, and in fact, they could have done something in his name. And realistically, you want to put a monetary value on this or something like that, something tangible to it. Win that game, keep him on the 53-man roster, get home field advantage, get a bye week, get all the way to the Super Bowl. That man just made $1 million more laying in bed. You could have done something for him in his name.
Because the
That's
teams in the
tangible.
playoffs get payouts. They get extra money for those games.
And so you say, well, the NFL did a neutral side and all these things, so it's fair now. No, it's not, because they didn't get a bye week. Had they won out and Kansas City won out, they won the tiebreaker. They would have had the bye week. Kansas City has the bye week right now.
I don't remember who I heard say this, but this was the absolute, it was just like a bolt of lightning of, duh, why didn't they do that? It's so obvious. Is um uh they should have very quickly. Now I kind of changed my mind because I was like, this
because you were
when
going
we
by empathy, not compassion.
well when we first talked about this, I was like, that doesn't make a lot of sense because they've had major injuries before and they've continued the game. When I went back and watched some of the clips, because I wasn't watching the game, I can see how you can't finish that game because you have grown ass men. Now, granted, we're all a bunch of weenies now, but I have not seen before, even with some serious injuries, like Alex Smith's injury, which I can't watch because it's really gross to watch a shin bone bend that way. Uh, that you have these grown masculine men just faces streaked with tears. They are so upset because you're having to revive someone there. So I can understand canceling the game then, but if the NFL had any intellectual honesty and any testicular fortitude, they would have very quickly said, all right, we're not continuing this game. Neither of these teams are in a position to play this game. Here's what we're going to do. Steve Kim, I think that's who I heard say this, who's primarily a boxing guy, but he's on Jason Whitlock's show and weighs in on this. His idea was, look, they should have very quickly said, we're not continuing this game. We're going to give them tomorrow off to collect themselves, and we're going to play this Monday night game Wednesday. All right. Then You do now. Normally, the last week of the season, you don't have a Monday night game because you don't want someone to get short shrifted in the playoffs. But because of the circumstance, they should have then taken the final game for both Cincinnati and Buffalo and put it on Monday night and had a Monday night doubleheader.
Yeah,
So,
that,
so
that's a
you
little better than I was thinking, but at the same time, you're still increasing injury risk by having those games packed together.
you're
Because
still
you're
shortening
talking
them,
three games. You're not talking just those two. You're
but it,
talking that
yeah,
one, the
yeah.
Monday night, and then the first playoff game. So it's
Well, then you would try and do your best to make sure that both of those teams play on Sunday. Now, it wouldn't have mattered as much for Buffalo because if they had won out, they would have had the bye anyway. But then try do what you can to make sure that Cincinnati plays on Sunday instead of or even Monday because they do play a wild card game Monday night. So if you could make them the Monday night game and
well,
and then you have some rest.
here's my thing. These NFL athletes like to think themselves as very badass, right? And you brought up military earlier. If someone goes down on a mission, you still finish the mission. You honor them, you do everything you can for them, but you still finish the mission. Are you badass or not? Because after he was carted off the field, it ceased to be about him. It was about the player. Like you said, tears streaking down. They were in no position to play. Man up, get up, play the
That is
game.
actually something that is really difficult for normal people to understand. And maybe next time when we have our special guest, we can ask him about this before we get into the awfulness that we're going to talk about. But in the military, they tell you mission men in that order. And that's hard for some people to understand that the mission comes first, then you take care of your men.
But then
And
let's
and
let's
for
be let's be human about it too. Now that we're talking about the football players, you need a coping mechanism for this thing that just made you cry.
mhm,
Play the fucking game you've been training for your entire life. Here's
mhm,
your coping mechanism. Go out and try to win. Take your mind off of it. Because what are you going to do going home? They
mhm.
probably went home and played video games or had a drink or something.
Well, and then the flight back for Buffalo, man, they're having to stew on it the whole time.
Mhm. Yeah, go out there, suck it up for a minute, win this one for your boy. There's coping mechanisms, there's manning up, there's all of these different things that go into it. And then there's life has to go on.
Well, and to that point, in that last game against New England, the crowd and the team were going nuts, and every score, every big play was for Damar Hamlin,
Mhm.
who I sent you a message. I don't know if you saw it, that it dawned on me that for like a month to 6 weeks or so, he was the DB in my fantasy team. So is this all my fault?
You do have that trend. I'm
I
not
do have
superstitious,
that
but you do
trend.
have that trend. So
Yeah,
anybody wants to blame anybody, there's your guy right there
it's
in the
my fault.
blue.
To to illustrate, who was that Cardinals running back who was big with Johnson? Larry
Yeah, yeah.
Johnson or one of the
Uh,
Johnsons. Yeah. So I had the first pick several years back. I drafted him. The very first game, he broke his ankle and was out for the season. That's kind of my run. Luck. I had luck as my QB. In fact, I drafted him big. I drafted him first and got made fun of because I thought he was going to have a Cam Newton like season. And like the second or third game, that's when he had his huge injury that knocked him out. And then like a year or two later, he said, "Yeah, I'm retiring. I'm not going to do this anymore."
well, I
All
had a
right.
great team this year. I was in the championship, and my championship hinged on Buffalo playing that game. Uh, and if the next week was any indicator, I would have won because
That
Buffalo
yeah,
defense got 43 points, and
I was gonna say I didn't look to see how many points they scored, but I was pretty sure that the defense scored at least two, if not three
yeah,
times in that game.
yeah, they had 43 points, and Diggs had 25. So that would have been more than the 30 points I needed to win the week before. So it was possible. I was a very Buffalo heavy team.
Okay, so while we're making Sam feel bad, let's share
Mhm.
this and see if let me pump my volume here because that usually helps. And at any point, just tell me to stop. I've got a point where I'm going to stop, but if you want to chime in, feel free to chime in here. I want to see your thoughts on Whitlock's take on this.
Shotgun marriages don't work, especially in modern America. We have too many options, too much easily accessible temptation to stick with a marriage we don't believe in. Just ask
My
the
head's
Houston
exploding. Can you see?
yesterday. They ended their second straight shotgun marriage hours after completing the regular season, divorcing themselves from head coach Lovie Smith less than a year after hiring him. When you're a billionaire, it's not cheaper to keep her. The NFL makes all of its employees sign a prenuptial agreement, a contract that limits the divorce settlement. Cal McNair, the owner of the Texans, would rather cut
Tommy
Smith
boy.
a $15 to $20 million check than continue in a relationship he doesn't believe has a real future. The Texans did the exact same thing a year ago when they decided to annul their marriage to David Culley, another coach they wed quickly with no real conviction. This is the consequence of the racial politics corporate media foisted upon the NFL and the league office adopted without pushback. Neither Smith nor Culley got the Houston job because management believed they were the best candidate. Smith and Culley were chosen largely because of their skin color, pressure from Roger Goodell and his top lieutenant Troy Vincent, and the NFL's desire to avoid being called racist over its treatment of black coaches. Houston was guilt-tripped into hiring Smith and Culley.
Okay, so
Okay. Yeah, bring us back. Oh, we don't
oh
have to
man,
bring me
you're all
back.
messed up. Ooh,
Oof.
that's bad.
All right. Well,
So now so the reason I stopped it there is because I was hoping I was going back and again looking for old stuff is annoying and I'm mad that I have to stop using DuckDuckGo because that was working for me for a while. But what is it you use? Um,
Brave.
Brave. Yeah. So like finding old stuff that's not part of the narrative is annoying. But am I remembering right that when Watson threw his hissy fit and wanted out, he made it a racial issue? Did
Uh,
he not? That he tried to make it a racial issue because one of his points was that he wanted his guy as the new GM. And then when they hired this guy from the Patriots front office, which you would think, yeah, no, duh, of course you hire the guy from the Patriots front office. He tried to make it a racial issue of, well, my guy's black and that guy's white, so that's why you didn't give.
briefly, but it didn't take off.
Yeah, I know it didn't
Yeah.
take off, and then very shortly after that, I think, is when all the stuff about his, skeeviness started to come out. But I seem to recall that he tried to make it a racial issue, and so it may
Well, here's the
and when
reason it didn't take off because the Texans front office tried to contact him multiple times before their hire, and he didn't answer.
that too.
And so they finally made a move, and then he answered after they made a move. So,
So I
but then
didn't.
he tried to make it a racial issue, but they were like,
Yeah.
yeah,
So from the outside looking in, because I'm not local, and most of what I know of that time was coming from the national sports media. The reason it didn't take hold is because Watson very quickly became a bad source.
yes,
But
yes.
but when Whitlock was talking about this, it reminded me of that and made me think: did they hire these guys to smooth over that potential racial issue? And they never really
There's another
wanted
one
them.
too. Because remember when D Hop left, he started
Mm,
making the comments about how it was the slave trade and da 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 and
I'd forgotten that too. Yeah, yeah.
which is really funny because we're kind of us and the Miami Dolphins, we're kind of like the evergreen university of the NFL because our front office is woke as fuck. But these things keep coming out because the more you give in, the more they take, right? So you show a little bit of weakness. Well, they were already showing the weakness. So Watson was like,
Hmm.
I can do this and I can get my way. Say it, but I
Hmm.
would agree with Whitlock on the Coley hire. but not on the Lovie Smith hire. Lovie Smith's too good of a coach to say that's the case.
Yeah, that one confused me because and that's kind of what I was thinking too, was you hire this guy who doesn't have a pedigree. I think he was a wide receivers coach. I don't think he'd ever been a
Yeah,
head
and not even a
coach.
very good one at that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he was a bit of a bizarre hire, but no,
Well,
grant.
and the worst thing was we had a chance that year to grab another who would have checked the same box, Bieniemy out of Kansas City, the offensive coordinator. Why they hired Culley and not Bieniemy, I don't know. Because if it was just the diversity hire, you would have satisfied that.
Now, Whitlock did bring up something later in his rant that I didn't realize, because I was a Lovie Smith fan when he was at Chicago. I like his, because and I'd forgotten this, that he comes from the Tony Dungy coaching tree. That he was under Tony Dungy when Dungy was at Tampa, and he's very similar in demeanor, which is one of the reasons I like him. But I also like defensive coaches,
Mm-hmm.
because I like some good defense, even though you're not allowed to play it anymore in the NFL. So I was really disappointed in that, but apparently Lovie Smith's last winning season was his last year in Chicago. And I'd forgotten that he coached a few years at Tampa before going to Illinois after losing his job at Tampa, and he never had a winning season at Tampa or at Illinois. Now, great, okay, that's true, and that's a mark against him, but you knew that when you hired him.
Mm-hmm.
So why are you getting rid of him after 1 year?
Well, but the thing is, he might have been in that same situation every time around. The the shotgun wedding situation, as Whitlock called it, every time. We're going
Yeah.
to bring you in as a stopgap. You're going to
Yeah.
bring order to the locker room, and then we're going to bring somebody else in. I like Lovey. I think he did as good a job as you could
I,
with the team we had this year. It
you know,
was
I mentioned, I don't know if it was at the game we went to or if it was when if it was later when we were watching, but you know, he was making me want to root for the Texans, and the only reason I don't is because I'm old and grumpy, and it pisses me off that they named themselves the Texans and not the Oilers. And I know they couldn't because the franchise moved to. No, you're the Titans. Shut up. You're the Titties. The Oilers are the Houston team. They should be able to call themselves the Oilers. But
well, the
I
Browns
like
were able
him,
to
and I
call
liked
themselves
what
the
he was.
Browns, even though the Ravens are the Browns,
Exactly. Exactly. I don't understand that. Why Cleveland still gets to be the Browns, but Houston can't be the Oilers with those frickin',
because
baby blue
oh, no,
jerseys.
wait, I almost said Robert Kraft. That's Patriots. Who was Titans? Well, that's because the Titans owner was actually a jackass. He would flip off the
Mm.
Houston fans every time they'd walk in, and all that kind of stuff. So you got the owner up there in the box flipping out the regular fans as they're walking under him. So he
Huh,
was kind of
that's
a
that's
douche.
interesting. I was
But
I was looking up his because I couldn't remember how long he was at Tampa, but just on the Wikipedia page, Smith was raised in Big Sandy, Texas, and won 3 straight titles as a star linebacker. That's cool. Okay, so how long was he at
okay, so if we
Tampa?
continue the pattern, who's our next head coach?
Oh, he was just there
I can
2014
tell
to
you if
15.
we continue the pattern.
So yeah, he didn't have a winning season at Tampa. He was just there a couple of years. That doesn't matter. All right.
So
Anyway,
next head coach of the Texans, my prediction, Byron Leftwich.
ooh, ooh, man.
People are calling for Sean Payton, but if we continue the same pattern,
You know what? You're right, because logically, because this is what I was thinking. The only reason you would fire him after 1 year, considering how bad a team you had, and so this was my thought process, and this was why, yes, I liked Lovey going into it, but then looking at his year here, he clearly had a mess. As you pointed out, not only did the Texans have the most dead cap space, but it was something like twice as much as the next closest team. And yet they had a lot of close games. Even though they only won a couple of games, they had a lot of close games. They played a lot of good teams, like that Eagles games we went to. That was way closer than it should have been.
Kansas City to overtime.
Kansas City to overtime.
Dallas to the last couple minutes.
Freaking the Cowgirls. Yeah. He played close games. He clearly had that team behind him. And my thought when I heard this was the only logical reason you would fire a coach with this pedigree who managed to perform this well with this bad of a team would be if you thought you had Sean Payton coming in. Because there's been a lot of talk about Sean Payton the last couple of weeks. Apparently he's already got a staff together or starting to put a staff together, and teams that are talking to him, like Denver was given permission to talk because he's still under contract under New Orleans. So if you hire him, you have to give compensation to New Orleans. So Denver talked to him, and my first thought was, logically, the only reason you would do this is if you had someone like Sean Payton coming in, a proven, took the Aints from the Aints to the Saints, finally won a Super Bowl for them, was a contender almost every year he was the coach there, and you have a regional connection there because Houston being where it is in relation to Louisiana and New Orleans, there's a lot of crossover there of fans. So that would make a lot of sense, both technically as far as the football nature of it goes, and then strategically as far as the marketing goes. But you're right, McNair is Tommy Boy. So we have to throw logic out the window.
No, I think they're going to make a play for Peyton, but they're not going to try as hard as other teams.
And I don't know that he would go there because they are so dysfunctional. Why would he want to?
Well, McNair is dysfunctional, but we finally have a good front office. We got rid of Easterby. We've got Cesario as our GM now.
He's a California kid. So I was just looking up real quick. Like if he was like a Southeast Texas person, maybe, but Sean Payton spent a lot of time in Dallas as an assistant. He was an assistant under Parcells. That's why there was a lot of speculation that maybe he would go to Dallas, but I don't see any reason he would go there. There's no personal connection, and professionally, it's a mess.
We'll see what happens. If it wasn't Sean Payton, I wouldn't mind Leftwich, but I would really like to see Bieniemy be pulled from the Kansas City Chiefs.
I think Leftwich would be a good pick if he would do it, and if McNair would get out of the fricking way, which I just from the outside looking in, I don't, maybe you know more listening to the local news down there, is he seems like a Jerry Jones, but without the intellect. Because as annoying as Jerry is, I mean, the guy played college football. He knows football. Now he doesn't know it as well as he thinks he does, and he doesn't know it as well as the professionals, but at least he knows it. So sometimes he gets things right, even when he butts his head in where it shouldn't be. McNair doesn't strike me as someone who knows what the hell is going on.
Well, there's a lot of things that have floated around, and we had Easterby for so long, who was making so many decisions, and people can't even tell you what his real title was. And then we had Rick Smith for so long as our GM, even though he was horrible. And there was a lot of talk of Easterby's got something on somebody. And it's not so much that Tommy Boy's making the decisions, it's just he's not stopping any of the bad juju either.
Now, I am right that the guy they did bring in for GM when they got rid of Bob was a Patriots guy, right?
Yeah, Cesario. Yeah, he's the guy who drafted Tom Brady, and that was the whole stink with Deshaun Watson. He's like, I didn't get to pick him. Blah, blah, blah. I'm like, you just got the GM who's most known for working with the quarterback of his team to build a team around him. And you're pissed about it?
Yeah.
You're a little baby. And I'm glad you're sucking in Cleveland, the cesspool of quarterback.
I thought they had finally turned that franchise around after decades of garbage. I mean, really since oh crap, I'm brain farting. What's his name? Cleveland's running back from the 70s. That's how far back you have to go. Brown, Jim Brown.
Jim Brown. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and even
I,
he
I
was
was
like,
going back even further to Thorpe, but
no.
yeah,
Jim
Jim
Brown, and
Brown.
he was like, he still had some years left in him. He was like, "Nah, I'm good. I'm done with this. I'm gonna go to Hollywood and start acting." And they've been dysfunctional that long. And I thought they'd finally turned it around,
It's
and
even a
then,
different franchise, and they're
man,
still that same dysfunctional.
yes, that is what is extra hilarious. Uh well, I hope Lovey Smith ends up somewhere because you know, I really thought he had kind of turned things around um culturally, which is the first step. You know, I was going to bring this up later and actually like bring up some sources, but okay, so I don't know if you know this, but when everyone thinks of Green Bay as this franchise, this dynasty, because they've been for so long. When Lombardi went there, they weren't. They were a joke. And so there's this great football slash life story of when he first went to Green Bay. And when he went in to talk to the team, he said, "This is a football." And he went on to say, "We are so broken, we have to get back to the basics. This is a football." He was telling him, "We are so far off the mark, we have to get that basic that we have to remind ourselves what the frickin' ball even is." And that was the beginning of Lombardi. And that is how he changed that culture and turned it into something that, I mean, for crying out loud, Green Bay should not exist. It is a small town. You know, it is only there because of the NFL team. And you know, it's like a college town. It's like, you know, you go to Stillwater where we went to school. That place would just be a speck with a couple of streetlights if it weren't for the college there, right? Well, that's how Green Bay is.
Traffic was so good in the Christmas break and the summer break, and then yeah,
Exactly. If the college wasn't there, both the kids and all the people that work there, that's like a two stoplight at most town, and then you're breezing through. And that's how Green Bay is. But yet Lombardi was able to create such a culture that it persisted even after he was gone. Tomlin's another one of these that is shocking to me that I the way they started awful, and yet he was able to kind of turn things around. And in any other year, they would have made the playoffs, but the AFC was so strong they didn't. And a large part of it is that culture in Pittsburgh, in the Steelers organization, that it doesn't matter who you are when you come into play or to coach, you are a Steeler. And they have instituted a culture. The inverse is also true. You look at the Browns, you look at the Texans, you know, Carolina. They had a couple of good years and then they fell apart and they've been a joke ever since.
well,
The
even this
Jaguars,
year, yeah, I
you
was
know,
about to
maybe they'll
say, a lot of people in our little group picked the Jaguars to go to the Super Bowl, and I'm like, they're still the Jaguars.
they have momentum. That the Jaguars are going to be a testament of how much momentum matters
Well,
because
and I believe in Trevor Lawrence because I was looking at him, and when he was drafted, everybody's like, "Oh, he's going to Jacksonville. He's going to be dead. He's not going to win." He's won at every level in his life.
mhm.
He had to go through a little adversity to grow, but you don't win that much and have that much wrong with you. So he's going to be okay. He
So
may
that's
end
a
up being a Matthew Stafford and never going anywhere till he goes somewhere else, but
mhm.
he's going to be okay as an individual.
So that's a good segue of where I wanted to talk about Lovie Smith a little bit because that was surprising when I heard that news. And I wanted to see what you thought. But then I figured we'd end on, you know, here's the bracket. Okay. So um what did you mentioned in our text group earlier that you had picked the 49ers and the Bills, I think it was at the beginning of the season. You saw no reason to change that, right? This matchup scares me because I hate Pete Carroll and I hate the Seahawks. And I think if you look at Pete Carroll versus Shanahan, that is not a good record for Shanahan. I think this is potentially a big upset.
I
And
think
I'm
earlier in the season you would be correct, but since McCaffrey's been in San Francisco,
well, so this is my concern here is that regression to the mean. And I was ranting about this back at Dak Prescott's first season. There is a reason rookie quarterbacks don't win playoff games because they're rookie quarterbacks. And I think I've ranted about this before of I never want to hear again when fans complain about a star player, a favored player leaving and going somewhere else. Hey, well, it's just business. Bullcrap. If it was just business, then in Dak Prescott's first year, when Romo got healthy, the coach and the coaching staff would have sat down and said, "Look, you are our future, young man. You have performed incredibly, but rookie quarterbacks do not win playoff games. Romo gives us the best chance to win in the playoffs. And then you are our quarterback going forward, for this franchise." And they didn't do that because it's not just business. So there's a reason rookie quarterbacks don't win, and especially against someone like Pete Carroll, who I despise the guy because I feel like he's one of those guys who is always smiling and happy, and he's the life of the party. And then, you get away from the crowd and he's a sleazy douchebag who nobody can stand. That's how he strikes me. And from numerous reports about how he knew what a mess USC was and he jumped ship right before the fecal matter hit the rotating blades. But I digress. As much as I don't like him, he's good at his job. And the way I figure it is you've got three weapons at San Francisco. You've got Debo. Well, he's been hurt all year. You've got Kittle and you've got McCaffrey. So if you can take away Kittle and or McCaffrey, how much do you have to worry about Debo? And Debo is going to have to be passed to by the last pick in the draft. I really feel like Carroll is going to scheme up something that is just going to make poor Brock Purdy look like the rookie that he is.
Well, but you're forgetting a significant factor. The reason I like the Niners is not because of their quarterback.
Defense, yeah.
It's the defense. And Geno's played better than he's ever played in his entire career, but not against the San Francisco defense.
Granted, but
the San Francisco the defense has made many people look stupid, including Pro Bowl quarterbacks.
So here's the other reason I look at that matchup and think this could be an upset worth betting on is that not only do rookie quarterbacks not win playoff games, but there are two times that I can think of where the best defense won it all, despite having a very mediocre offense and a very mediocre
Tampa Bay and Baltimore.
You have had a lot of other instances where you have had great defense. We were just talking about Lovie Smith, Chicago. He couldn't get it done. He never had the offense to match that incredible defense that he put together.
Well, I didn't say they were going to win the Super Bowl. I said they're going to make it to the Super Bowl. A la Lovie Smith, Chicago Bears, with Brian Greasy, Rex Grossman as your quarterbacks.
Granted, but Seattle's defense isn't the number one defense. It's not as good as the 49ers, but it's still really darn good. And is the offense playing good enough to...
Well, remember, they're banged up on offense too. They're down to one running back who's really good, but he's been banged up. DK Metcalf's been banged up all year. Tyler Lockett's banged up. So who's he going to throw to?
So I
We might
messaged
have a
you earlier.
6-3 game here.
Yeah, yeah. I messaged you earlier that like several weeks ago I had decided, you know what? I'm rooting for the Vikings and the Bills because gosh darn it, fate has to let one of those two teams win eventually, unless the world ends, which is a distinct possibility, but I digress. But looking at the NFC, um, if they don't get upset, I don't see anyone beating the 49ers because the Eagles kind of backed into the playoffs, and I never trust a team. That were the Cowboys' problem, even when they had good years with Romo, is they would have these great Novembers, and they would kind of stink it up in December and back into the playoffs and then lose in the first round. So that's kind of how I look at the Eagles right now, is no matter how that matchup ends up, um, whether it's the Bucks or the Cowboys, uh I don't care because even if they move on, if they face the 49ers, I don't have a lot of confidence in them winning because I feel like they kind of backed into the playoffs. And part of that is Jalen Hurts being hurt. And I don't know what his health is, and I don't know about the rest of that team. So I would have more confidence if the 49ers get past the Seattle. I think they're the favorite out of the NFC for sure. Uh, to me, the AFC is a little more fun. Um, because you have the Bengals who at the beginning of the season looked like who are these guys and what happened to the team that made it to the playoffs, to the Super Bowl. And they finally got it together, and now they're the number 3 seed. Um, the Ravens, if they don't have Lamar Jackson, I don't trust them at all. That's the downside to their team, is without Lamar Jackson, they just don't exist.
Well, and same with the Dolphins and Tua.
And same with the Dolphins and Tua, is the Bills should win this game. It's not clear if Tua's going to play, and if he doesn't, they're going to win that game. And then the Jags and Chargers. These are the two teams that are like, who are these two teams? I don't
Except
know.
the Chargers ended this season really strong.
And that's why this matchup is the most interesting to me, because how much does momentum matter? That both of these teams really struggled in the first half of the season, and then they came on in the last half of the season. So
yeah. Well,
whose
remember if you
momentum is going to carry them
remember my
through?
bracket, I actually chose the Chargers to upset the Chiefs after beating the Jags. So it's it's Bills Chargers in the AFC Championship in my bracket, and that would make it in Buffalo because they won't have the neutral site. They only have the neutral site if it's Chiefs Bills.
Yeah. Which will be interesting. I haven't looked to see what Chiefs fans are saying about that. I'm still leaning on the Bills.
That's the whole thing I talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Had the Bills won out, they would have been number 1 seed. So Chiefs fans have to suck it up at this case. We're doing the best we can because they made a decision that day.
The Bills were my early pick, and I'm sticking with them. And I actually think they have a little extra because they have that emotional boost that you saw on Sunday when they were playing in the New England game. So who knows how long that lasts, but they've got a bit of an emotional boost, and they're playing very well, and they have been all season. So I'm going to stick with the Bills on the AFC. It's hard for me to pick an NFC team. Like I said, it's like I'm picking I would pick the 49ers by default just because I like them more than the Eagles. I trust them more than the Eagles, but they've got a rookie quarterback.
Yeah, but here's
and they've got a bad first round matchup.
But here's the thing about the rookie quarterback. So when we're looking at McCaffrey, think back of the days of Marshall Faulk. You've got a running back that runs well, but in the passing game makes bad quarterbacks look good. So you always have the dump off for a big gain. He's like, again, I compare him to Marshall Faulk,
what has made Purdy look so good is that you have two of those, because you have Kittle too.
Yeah.
And your tight end is your other dump off. And you have easily the second best tight end in the league next to Kelsey.
Well,
So,
and you have also arguably the best quarterbacks coach as your head coach in Kyle Shanahan.
yeah.
He was probably the best quarterback coach of recent history, and he's the head coach. There's no surprise to me that every quarterback that's gone into that system has done well.
So I don't trust the Cowboys, even though they've been playing good. But that last game was awful.
I'm surprised to hear
And
you not be a believer still, but at the same time, I know where you're coming from because it's the truth.
well, and it's a big point to that is that Green Bay game. They should have won that Green Bay game, but there's something about Aaron Rodgers that the Cowboys cannot beat Aaron Rodgers, and it's really freaking annoying. And they're same thing with Brady, and they're playing them in the first round. If the Bucks beat the Cowboys, which I haven't looked at I know the seeding is that the Bucks are but I have to assume the Cowboys are the favored team there. If the Bucks beat the Cowboys, I would lean towards picking them
Go
because
all the way.
yeah, if they get some momentum, if they get some belief, if they start to finally, after the entire freaking season, click on all cylinders, I don't trust anyone else in the NFC that much that I would pick the 45-year-old geezer if things get clicking.
I just don't think they match up well with the Eagles. So I think the Eagles would take the Bucks
But
if that became it. I think the Niners would beat the Eagles because of the defense. But I don't see the Bucks beating the Eagles.
the last 3 or 4 games, the Bucks defense had gotten healthy and were looking like the Bucks defense. So I think they could. And to me, it's about the quarterback play as much as it annoys me. The problem with the NFC is there are no quarterbacks that I trust there, except for Tom Brady, and he has not looked like Tom Brady all season. So if the Bucks can get past the Cowboys, the reason I could see them going and it being Bills versus Bucks is because if that defense is healthy and looking as good as it looked the last 3 or 4 games of the season, I think they could embarrass any of those quarterbacks in the rest of the NFC. Kirk Cousins with the Vikings, he's never been able to perform on the big stage. Jalen Hurts is still young, and we don't know how healthy he is. Geno Smith is Geno Smith, despite how well he's looked. Brock Purdy was the last freaking pick in the league. Frickin' Dak Prescott, who's being paid $40 million, threw more interceptions than anyone else in the league, and he missed 5 frickin' games. So yes, clearly I don't trust him. And then who else? Oh, the Nats. Yes, the Nats. And who knows what the heck is going on with that
Yeah,
quarterback.
do they even know what their quarterback is?
At times he has looked like the franchise quarterback they thought he was when they drafted him, and at other times he has looked like what everyone else said he was when the Nats drafted him and said, "Why the hell did you draft him?"
Yeah, I don't know. That's the thing. Brock Purdy looked good. He's going to have rookie mistakes.
Mhm.
But you brought up the last pick in the draft. We've got unrestricted, or we've got free agents that have done very well. Kurt Warner. Yeah. With the same setup. Kurt Warner
Yeah.
had Marshall Faulk,
Yeah.
and Purdy has.
And he didn't have the tight end like Kittle, but he had what's it? Who was he had a wide receiver those first few years in St. Louis who was redonkulous. And I'm drawing a blank on his name. Smith? No, wait. I think he was a Bill. I don't know. I'm gonna have to go look that up because that's bothering me. But he had some receivers too, and he could chuck it down the field. So you play action off of Falk, and you also have that short dump off game that you can rely on with Marshall Falk, and then you can chuck it down the field.
Isaac Bruce.
Isaac Bruce. I kept wanting to say Bruce Smith.
Terry Holtz. Torrey Holtz. Excuse me, Torrey Holtz.
Holt. That was the other one I was trying to think of. Yeah. So Yeah, he had the pieces around him. And that's my problem with the 49ers. That's why I have trouble fully believing in Purdy, even though it's a great story, and this may be my bias because I picked him as my top receiver and it pissed me off the whole season. Like
Debo.
30 minutes after the draft, and he said, "Yeah, I think Devo's overrated." And I said, "Shut up." And yeah, he was hurt the whole freaking year. So outside of McCaffrey and Kittle, I don't know who you have on that offense.
We'll see. I still
We'll
trust in
see.
their defense, but and
Yeah.
again, Kittle and McCaffrey versus Bruce and Falk. You had a longer game,
Hmm.
but at the same time, you've got to march down the field and score touchdowns game.
Yeah.
And with that defense, you're keeping them rested. They play well. You're still scoring, maybe not as much as the greatest show on turf, but
It, if the Bucks upset the Cowboys like I think they will, and then upset the Eagles like I think they will if they get past them, that would be a fun matchup to watch. An NFC championship game that's the Bucks versus the 49ers. That would be a fun, now probably not for anyone else, but for us, that would be a fun matchup to watch.
who the
The 49ers and the Bucks in the NFC championship.
Oh yeah, that would be really fun. But yeah, I think it's going to be 49ers Bills. I think Bills take it if that gets to be the case. Uh Kansas City's always the wild card.
So let me bring this back up real quick and let's end on this. Um I have so little faith in anyone in the NFC. Um, at what point would you say the NFC could win the Super Bowl? If 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 which one of these teams? Because the top three seeds, I would say no. Kansas City, Buffalo, and Cincinnati. I would not trust any of these teams to beat either of those three teams. So,
No, I disagree about Cincinnati.
okay.
I think the Eagles can beat them. I think the Vikings can beat them. I think the Niners can beat them. In fact, I think some of those three had beat them. Uh,
Yes, but that was earlier in the season when they were struggling to figure out how to play. Because I think the Cowboys beat them early in the season, and that win doesn't look nearly as good as it would later in the season.
See, here's the problem with the Chiefs. I just watched my horrible Texans team
Hmm.
go to overtime with them. Now, they can beat anybody, but they can also lose to anybody. Bills are more consistent. Uh, Chargers have been on fire lately.
Yeah, I don't trust the Jags because they're the Jags, and there is an organizational issue there, like we talked about. I would bet on the Chargers over pretty much any of these NFC teams.
If Tua,
Caveat being if they're healthy.
if Tua's not playing, I don't trust the Dolphins against anybody. If he's
But
playing, they could technically beat anybody.
yes,
Yeah.
their defense has played very well through the season, and Tua and Tyreek Hill together are a very dynamic threat that a lot of people have had trouble dealing with.
But they
I
do
don't
lack a little bit of run game.
I don't know how as much as I like Lamar Jackson as a person personally, I don't know how much I trust the Ravens even if he's healthy.
No, I think if they manage to pull the upset here, which I think they have a chance, I don't think they make it past the Chiefs.
Yeah.
Uh, and the only way my scenario doesn't work out is if the Bengals have to win for my scenario to work out, because Ravens would play the Chiefs and Chargers would go on to play the winner of the Bills and Dolphins. And I don't think the Chargers beat the Bills. Interesting one. No, I think the Vikings could beat anybody on any given day. I just don't think they can do it for 3 games in a row.
Uh, Assuming Tua is healthy and plays here, um, I would take any AFC team except the Ravens and the Jags over any of the NFC teams.
It's a big assumption, though.
No, yeah. That is a big assumption. It's also assuming that in the Super Bowl he doesn't get knocked out by a big hit. But that's just how I feel about the NFC this year.
No, I think actually the Eagles Chiefs would be an interesting matchup because that would probably be the offensive explosion we would want in a Super
And
Bowl.
you've got the fun, Andy Reid versus his old team matchup there.
Yeah, you got that, and Jalen Hurts. Yeah, he's young, and we don't know how healthy, but man, that kid scores. So that would be a score fest, and that would be interesting to watch. But yeah, it's hard to say. It's hard to say. I think the strongest team there is the Bills. I think the second strongest is the Niners, and then Chiefs could beat anybody. Eagles are in the same boat. With offense, they could beat anybody, but if they don't get on fire, they're going to lose that game.
I so your favorite right now, your pick is the Bills 49ers. Um, Mine is the Bills Eagles. Just because they have home field advantage and with that defense, even with stinking Minshew, they still played some people tough. They dropped a couple of games there, but they still looked pretty good, even with Gardner Minshew in as quarterback. So even if Jalen Hurts is like 80%, I still feel like they're they've got to be the favorites in the NFC. So I'm leaning towards, I'm not strongly confident in it, but my top pick right now, that's what I'm going with, is Bills Eagles. So Buffalo wings versus Philly cheesesteaks.
Yeah, that's the important part, the food.
That's the important part.
But we've done the Philly cheesesteaks, and since we're
Mhm.
doing buffalo wings, if that's the case, you got to do a dessert or something. I don't know.
I don't know. I
A
mean,
good bridge to cross when we get there.
yeah,
But
yeah. All right. Well, that's all we got. We have rambled and ranted for a while here, so we will see y'all next time, which will be something.
yeah, I don't know about tomorrow, but Thursday definitely I'll be good.
All
So,
right. I'll check with our special guest and we'll see what we're going to rant about.
all right. Talk to you later.